Welcome to Mentoring in Real Life, where we talk about what it takes to find and be a great mentor. I'm Angela, and together with my co-host Bill, we know the power of mentoring and what it can do in your life on both sides of the table. If you're interested in learning tips, tricks, and hearing stories about mentoring, you're in the right place. Come join us. Hey Bill, how you doing?
Well, I've never been this happy. How about you, Angela?
I'm tippy tappy and very excited about today's podcast topic.
I'm with you. This one really counts. Frankly, it counts equally for mentors and mentees. We're talking about today the importance of health and wellness, regardless of what stage you are in your career, what role you have. And so the ideas we're going to talk about applying advice to mentees as well as to self-checks for the mentors themselves who have already progressed in their career and in their personal lives. We want to thank Andrew Hall, who works for LA County, for bringing this topic of interest to us. So thanks very much, Andrew. This one's for you and frankly for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Really what this has to do with is keeping trust with yourself and with your family and recognizing that it's just as important as keeping it at work. When you are maintaining your health goals and your wellness goals, then that is keeping a promise to yourself. And really, unhealthy people who we have seen, Bill, they're no good to their work.
You're saying like you know somebody personally like that was that way.
I'm not saying you. I'm saying you and I have seen people who are unhealthy at work. And we know that they'd just be better at work, better at home, better for themselves if they did have a focus on their health and wellness. And what we're talking about today is setting reasonable and healthy boundaries for working hours, email responses, that kind of thing, and making those legitimate. And we know that there are work cultures that seem to thrive in round the clock demands, that they want you there 20 hours a day. But really, that's not sustainable for long periods of time. Not to mention, it damages family relationships from such schedules that can be really difficult to recover from. So what you and I are focused on is, acknowledging and knowing that there might be companies out there that really do want to squeeze every little bit out of their employees, and there are employees that probably love being there. And what we're talking about is from an individual's perspective, how to set themselves up for an enduring career and being able to sustain that enduring career because they have a focus on their health and wellness.
Yeah, and frankly, I would say it's not just an enduring career, but how about an enduring life? If you love what you're doing and so you're there 20 hours a day, somebody would have to pull you away with a hook because you just want to be there all the time. That's one level of commitment to that. But if you're there because somebody else says you need to be here 20 hours a day, that's a very different effect and a different way of living your life around work. Clearly, as you progress in your career, you're going to have more responsibilities and your schedule's going to get harder. I certainly know this from personal experience. So when I was laughing a little bit earlier, I wasn't kidding. When I started as the executive director at our organization, I made a big mistake. And I said, work is first, at all hours of the day. And the truth of the matter is there's always more work than ever can be done in any given day. So in the early days, I stopped working out in favor of putting in a few extra hours. And so the short version of that is my stress level went up, my blood pressure went up, my weight went up, and I slept less. And on top of that, I was less effective at work. I was less clear in my decision making. I was less able to roll with sort of the ups and downs of life and work. And I was less present at home. But other than that, everything was perfect. So
sounds like a recipe for, positive health there, Bill.
Yeah, well, it was my recipe for not being effective at work, not being, a good partner at home, and frankly, it's a recipe for a much shorter lifespan.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not just making sure you have good health boundaries based on work, but also we're also bringing up relationships as well. So I recall a coworker who relayed that his kids kept complaining when they would be, quote, spending time together, watching a movie or a TV show in the evenings or on the weekends. And he was constantly double tasking with his laptop and doing work on his lap. So he wasn't even present with his family. So that led, obviously he didn't have clear boundaries around his time with respect to that. And that really had consequences to relationships that he had at home. And so we're getting into all of that as well. And these are anecdotes from our own experiences or observations that we've seen, but we want to get into it from a broader perspective. Really, here's ultimately the problem scope that we're talking about today. You got promoted, your scope got bigger, and suddenly your calendar is less yours than it was previously. You have less time autonomy than you had previously. You've got stacked meetings, you've got many more decisions that are coming at you. And the first things often to disappear, like you just talked about with your own experience, are workouts, real meals, sleep, and just having mental space to allow for some clarity. And I got to tell you, Bill, a lot of people just assume this is just the cost of leadership. My health has to wait. What do you think about that?
Yeah, first off, I totally agree with it, that people come at it that way, and that's what they think is the truth. And it certainly is not. It's not some lack of discipline or motivation. People are doing exactly what they think that role is asking of them. But I would argue that you should probably try to reframe the problem a little bit. The real issue isn't that you stop caring about your health. It's really the way you manage your health before your promotion doesn't really work anymore at this level, perhaps. And so, the more senior you get, the more the role changes for how time, energy, and control actually function for you. And frankly, most professionals are not given any training on how to adapt as they go up the chain. And so I would suggest that leaders who are able to stay healthy have better habits because they use a different system to approach that.
Yeah, they use a different system than the one that worked before they started going up the chain, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And really, what actually changes when responsibility increases is your control over your time drops sharply, right? So your calendar is no longer yours alone. There's more non-optional meetings that you've got to attend. You have decisions pulling you in multiple directions, and other people's urgencies set your schedule. So health routines that worked before, you got up, you were at the gym by 7 a.m., you had a protected lunch period, you had predictable evenings. They break down because they all rely on time autonomy that you no longer have, or that you perceive that you no longer have.
Yeah, so I want to interject before you continue, because there's an important line that you had right there at the end. Even before I became the big boss, I was still the next level down, and I thought my boss expected me to be there the same hours they were, and I'm not talking about number of hours. I had to be there exactly when they were there. And so I stopped doing the workouts because some of my workouts were, I would have to leave at 5 o'clock at night, which for us when we started at 7, that was after my 10-hour day. Oh, I can't possibly leave at 5. And I finally went to the boss and I said, look, I've stopped working out and it's really not healthy. I need to put in a couple of workouts. So I'm going to need to leave the office, by 5 a couple of nights a week. And she looked at me like, well, yeah, leave at 5. I'm not keeping you here at 5. And so that's why I want to talk about the fact that it's important to recognize what parts of your calendar are yours and which are not, and make sure that you're not just perceiving that you don't have the time to do some things at some part of the day that you used to do it. So that's an important distinction to be made here that we talked about. Many people say, my counter's not mine. Okay, I acknowledge that up to a point, but there's very few jobs where your calendar's not yours 24 hours of the day. I get the main workday can be largely dictated by outside forces, but you do have some control, and it's important to exercise that control.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about calendar management a little further in the episode. Another reason why there's an impact to health when you get promoted is because your cognitive load increases even if your hours don't. So even if you're not working more hours, you're actually still carrying a lot more mental weight, right? You are responsible now for not just tasks, but rather business outcomes. And that carries a lot more responsibility and weight. You are now responsible for thinking further ahead and across more variables across the entire business structure. And you also tend to absorb other people's stress and uncertainty across a larger part of the organization. And so all of that drains energy faster, making healthy choices feel harder, even when you know better.
Yeah, the health part is sort of this invisible work responsibility that you have. And typically at work, leadership rewards output and judgment and availability, not necessarily the recovery from all of the hard work that you're doing. Because, nobody sees you sleep better or eat well, or there's no praise that you typically get for saying no so that you can protect your energy level. The signals you're typically getting are that they reinforce the sacrifice over sustainability. And so the health slowly gets deprioritized, not intentionally, but sort of structurally, it just seems to go away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's when those old patterns stop working, right? So many leaders were promoted because they pushed through the fatigue. They skipped the meals because they had extra meetings that they wanted to attend or have visibility into it. They worked late and because they wanted to be in the building the same hours as the boss, like you talked about just a minute ago in your story about your previous boss. They were endlessly available. They didn't have boundaries around their time at night. They didn't have, they were always available day and night for not only their teammates, their subordinates, and their bosses. And so all of that really impacts health because your old patterns aren't working anymore.
Right. I mean, actually, I had a recent conversation with a guy who had sort of recently moved into an executive position, and this is a guy at a major tech firm. It happens that he's divorced, and he still has young kids, and so his bosses were putting all sorts of continued responsibilities on him and sending him emails and all kinds of stuff late at night. And he came to me and said, I'm trying to put a boundary on, I don't want to be contacted past 7 unless, the building is burning down. And I actually was very supportive of that. If your bosses say that you can't turn off your phone ever, or you can't, choose some time with your family, I'm sorry, but I'm going to tell you that if that's their consistent thought, like 24/7, 365 days a year, I'm going to recommend you go find someplace else to work, unless you love it there that much, because that's not healthy. And I was totally supportive of his approach that says, I want to be able to spend time with my kids after 7 p.m. They got homework, they got school stuff, they got sports stuff, they got whatever, and he wants time with his kids. And in our experience, you're not going to get a chance to do that over again,
No.
right? And so that's a good choice, in my opinion. And I strongly support people who make those kinds of choices. It says, I'm going to balance work and family life. And it turns out, as he said, at first there was a little bit of resistance. But he said, but, the first thing the next morning, I'm on all that stuff. I get it done. I just am not going to be reacting to it at 7 at night. All right, come on, guys. If somebody's going to say, yes, but you don't understand when there's a real emergency. Yes, when there's a real emergency, you need to react to it whenever it happens. I totally get that. But those real emergencies aren't every night. They aren't even every week, generally speaking. And so having boundaries is just a really important part for making sure that you're managing your health, your mental and physical well-being.
Yeah. You know what, though? Boundaries sometimes feel riskier at those higher levels. Sometimes, especially early in a new role, leaders think, I need to prove myself in this role. I can't be the bottleneck, for decision making. I'll focus on health once things settle down. The problem is things rarely settle down on their own unless you make a concerted effort to make those changes, right?
Absolutely. So what that's saying is, the health isn't really suffering after promotion because somebody's weak or they're undisciplined. It's because the promotion sort of changed the rules and everybody's still playing by their old rules. Again, because there's not much training that comes along with how do I manage my new life. And so the truth of it is the people who are staying healthy aren't really trying harder. They've redesigned how they're protecting their time, their energy, their attention, and their recovery inside the reality of the new senior role. And so, first of all, you got to start by identifying where do you have autonomy? Where do you have the control? And that awareness is really, really key. And I'll give another shout out to our manager tools friends who told me a long time ago, show me your calendar and I'll show you your priorities. And so use your calendar to make sure that your highest priorities are included in your schedule. And even if you aren't putting it on your public work schedule, make sure that the schedule that you're maintaining, the parts that you control, you're putting in the stuff that really counts for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. There is some autonomy. It's not true to say that there's no autonomy, like you said, in a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week schedule. And there is less autonomy for leaders. And so when there is less autonomy, healthy leaders identify when they have high energy and when they have low energy throughout the day. And they match their health behaviors more to high energy times rather than clock times. So some examples of that are doing some light movement or walking calls during mentally heavy afternoons, because that actually gets your energy up. When you're moving your body, your energy increases. They do things like strength training or focused exercise only on days that energy is high, and that might be no days. And in that case, we're going to talk a little bit about some micro exercises that you can do as well. Really, they also make it so that it's low friction on what they're going to eat on decision heavy days. So they don't have decision fatigue. They already know and have planned out what a good meal is going to be on those kind of days or weeks. This removes the I missed my window, so I failed mindset, and also helps them stay so that they're not burnt out from being misaligned with their work.
Yeah, so I would suggest, if you're going to try and protect your energy, through the days, do you want to do strategic thinking when you have pretty high energy? And so manage your calendar to support those meetings at the high energy times. I even when I was the big boss and there were tons of people who were trying to control my calendar, there were a lot of the meetings that were driven from, at least from the inside, you could influence it. You can't get rid of the meetings, but you could drive timing of those meetings and make sure it matches the right times of the day for you and the work that needs to get done. And then at the opposite end, when you got low energy, okay, do your admin work during the low energy times, and try to avoid, at least when possible, sort of back to back, really, really high stakes conversations, because those are hugely draining. And if we can do those kind of things, we're going to reduce the unnecessary drain without changing the total workload. It's also protected by removing decisions as much as possible.
Yeah. So energy is also protected when leaders can remove decisions as much as possible. So senior leaders lose energy faster from decisions than they do from losing the hours in their day. And let's talk about some practical moves that can help reduce decisions. What would standardized meals look like? Every workday, you know that overnight oats are going to be your breakfast with some protein powder in it. You're going to have a tuna sandwich with an apple for lunch. You know what your standardized meals are going to be, and you know that they keep you satiated, and you know they have good macros or whatever your goals might be. Set those up over the weekend or before your work week starts so that you know what you're going to be eating. As far as clothes are concerned, it's funny because I wear the same black shirt. I have 5 of them, and I wear
I was going to ask you about that. It's like you have just the same one. So I wouldn't want to be next to you while we're doing this podcast. Is that what you're saying?
I actually wash them
Okay.
amazingly and I
Okay. That's good to
shower.
hear.
But what I did was I like this shirt and I literally bought 5 of them, the same exact one, so that when it's time and I know it's the recording day, I put on the shirt. No decision necessary on what it is I'm going to wear. And we can do the same thing at work as well. And then same with your workouts. What are going to be some consistent workouts? You mentioned earlier that every Tuesday and Thursday you had to leave to go do your workout with your spouse, and that was not a decision you had to make. It was known, it was in your calendar, and you knew that that was going to be part of your work week. So those are the kind of ways that we can remove decisions as much as possible. We can also communicate with our staff what gets a yes and what gets a no automatically. So we can create some decision rules that our staff actually aligns to. We can delegate decisions and not just tasks. So this gets into the art of delegation, which is its own podcast, which we can get into another time. But really what we're talking about here is when you give a project to someone, be okay with the decision that they make. Don't have them come to you to make decisions and be the bottleneck. An example might be they're in charge of updating all the office furniture. You give them some parameters around it. Don't spend more than $500 on a desk, whatever the parameters might be. And then you be okay with how they execute that project. Bill, do you have any examples of that?
Well, absolutely. So, I mean, the furniture one is a good one, but it also comes true for technical things that you want people to do. Give them as you said, give them the parameters. These are the non-negotiable boundary conditions for the outcome. Inside of that, go make a decision and be okay, even if it's not the decision you would have made when you were in that position. So what? If it still meets the requirements, then be okay with that and just let that one go, and take that decision off your plate. And so the more senior you are, the more time there will be opportunity for you to do that kind of thing. There'll be lots of decisions and lots of projects going on. Great. You want to set boundary conditions about what the final expectations are, but how they get there, be okay with letting folks take care of that for you. And if you say, well, yeah, but I really don't want that outcome. Okay, so the next time you'll have a better set of boundary conditions that you'll give somebody when they do it. But as Angela was talking about, you got to get some of those decisions off your plate, or they will forever be in your brain and it will drain the crap out of you.
Absolutely. We have seen people when they get promoted that don't give up the job that they had before their promotion, right? So they're doing their old job as well as their new job. And this also gets into the art of delegation, where if you're not delegating effectively, then you're not building your team's skills. If you're doing that, then you're not focused on the work required at your new role and level. If you've been promoted and you're still doing the work you did before, it's time to reevaluate. And in any case, it's likely not sustainable.
Absolutely. You need to foot stop that one. When you get promoted, the old job is not your job anymore. And you need to be willing to hand that off. I have had mentees who said, Yeah, but I still have to do that work. They're not ready to do that work. Well, we could have a whole separate conversation, and there is a separate podcast about making sure that you're training your relief throughout your time. But the other part of it is they're going to have to do some learning. So it fits in with this discussion about letting them make decisions. Give them boundary conditions and let them go figure it out, and let go of that work, because that once you move up, it's time to let go of that stuff.
Absolutely. And so the first thing that leaders do is they manage their energy. The second thing that we're going to talk about is they use minimum effective habits. So instead of aiming for ideal routines, start aiming for non-negotiable baselines. For example, instead of something like 60-minute workouts, they might use 15 to 25-minute workouts that always happen. Instead of perfect nutrition, they use reliable defaults, the same breakfast, the same snacks, the same go-to meals. And they eat real meals and not just snack throughout the day. Consistency beats intensity when schedules are unstable. So recognize that workouts are just as important for your mental health as they are for your physical health.
Yeah, that certainly is another foot stomp moment there. There's no doubt, if we're going back to my early days as the ED, my mental well-being was really suffering because I was not doing the workouts and I wasn't eating regularly. And you were actually much, much less effective. So make it easier on yourself. The consistency thought is such a powerful tool, and it's really, really simple. Most people don't need to have a gourmet lunch every day. Okay, good. So find stuff that you like, make sure it's around, make sure you can have that every day, and take it with you. And I mean, there's just simple things that you can do that make this discussion very, very straightforward and protects your health in a very, very positive way. So when we go past just the basics of the, what kind of workouts are you willing to tolerate, there's also habits that you want to create that you can attach to existing commitments. And so, for instance, okay, we talked about workouts before, formalized workouts, but what about having a walking meeting instead of a sitting meeting? Or what about, mobility, moving around and stretching and so forth in between calls, or doing that stretching anytime there's a break in the agenda, and you're turning health into part of your workday rather than something that's competing with the workday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would often take one-on-ones on walks. So that was something
Great.
that multiple times a week then I was getting out with my teammates and getting a walk in while we conduct our one-on-ones, while I'm giving them feedback. They're giving, telling me what's going on with their projects and such. And that just was invaluable to both of us, from not only how the role was going for them and just keeping them on track, but also just from a health and wellness perspective as well. One thought that a leader also has to consider is they've got to decide in advance what does give under pressure. When schedules explode, something is going to drop. And so what you can do is put blocks into your calendar for things that are non-negotiable. Healthy leaders decide ahead of time what is non-negotiable. Things like sleep, daily movement. So I was a single mom for a period of time, and I still had a demanding role working for you, Bill, in our
I
organization.
don't know what you're talking about.
And I actually had to make choices about what was non-negotiable to me. And for me, it was getting a workout in, and I had to do it in the morning. So what that meant was I made choices that I was not watching TV shows or movies or anything like that in the evenings. I was not scrolling on social media. Instead, I would literally go to sleep not long after my daughter did. Often I actually fell asleep when I was reading to her in bed as well. So that often meant I was asleep by 8 p.m. so that I could get up at 4 a.m., do a workout at home before I needed to get her up, get us ready for leaving for the day to go to work. And it just was the choice that I made to make sure that I could maintain my health.
Yes. Yeah. So thank you once again for your reference to habit number one from the 7 habits, but it's an important conversation when we're talking about health. You made conscious choices about what was important to you, and you put first things first. So now we've got a couple of habits going there, right? A couple of 7 habits. But I'm serious about this. If you can choose to stay up all night and scroll through social media, but then when you come back and you're complaining to your mentor and saying, I never have time to work out. Okay, well, those are choices, folks. And so, I think, Angela, you were absolutely modeling the behavior that says, if that's important to me, I'm putting it into my schedule. And that wasn't your workday schedule. That was your personal schedule. You said, I'm going to make sure there's time to take care of my health. I think that's just invaluable advice that anybody can do. Anybody can do.
Yeah. So when you decide what in advance gives under pressure, that helps prevent stress-driven decision making that always tends to cut health first.
But while we're talking about this, it's not just the outputs. The people who are managers who are really controlling what's going on and staying healthy, they're managing inputs, not just the outputs, right? So they're getting rid of the unnecessary meetings, and they're making sure that the ones that they do have to go to are structured efficiently, at least the ones that they control. And where possible, sort of reduce the decision volume that you have, and make sure that you have some recovery gaps, in between meetings. And when I say that, like even 5 minutes, it's particularly as you move up the chain, you do get to say, hey, don't put meetings back to back so there literally is no time between meetings. I'm going to have 5 minutes where I get up and walk around, I get up and stretch, I do something that gives me a chance to recover. And so you're not just protecting your physical health, but your mental health as well. The meetings are certainly unavoidable in most situations, but how you enter and how you exit are not. So, before your next call, take a couple of slow, deep breaths, the meditation types of breaths, and stand up or walk around for the first minute of the meeting. The micro resets, sort of stop all of the residue that's sort of hanging out in your brain, and gives you a reset for, okay, I'm ready to take on the next subject. If you never do that, everything gets jumbled together. You linger on all the events from the day, and that really does interfere with focus. It's going to slow your ability to sort of deal with the tasks at hand and the discussions at hand.
One way you and I also have dealt with making sure that we don't have things lingering in our brain all day is by writing things down. So I know you and I both have a tendency, we've always got a little notepad to write down, oh, I got to remember to do that. Oh, I got to take a note to talk to him, or whatever it might be. That helps get that cognitive residue out of our brains so that we're more present at the task at hand or the meeting at hand.
Absolutely. Well, so I'll do a shout out to another book that we've talked about previously that helps with this. David Allen, Getting Things Done. He's a big list guy, and getting that stuff out so that you can get your mind ready for whatever's coming next, as opposed to still thinking about, oh, don't forget to write that down, or don't forget to get that done. No, write it down and put that away so that you can move on to the next thing. So the write it down message is a really strong and productive way to look at this.
Yeah. So one motivator that helps some individuals is the idea of guilting their way into making better health habits. Leaders actually can stop using guilt as a motivator because it works in the short term, but what we're talking about is sustainable activities that will help a leader grow in their career. Many healthy leaders treat health like a leadership infrastructure, not just self-improvement. So it's an inherent part of them as they show up to work. And what they do then is they'll measure sustainability. How many times have they done those micro workouts like we were talking about? Not just streaks, like did they do those hour-long CrossFit workouts, 5 days a week? they know that weeks are going to go sideways. And when weeks go sideways, they adjust without self-judgment. This keeps them engaged in health and wellness goals instead of just getting stuck in restart cycles where they can feel bad about what they haven't done and instead focus on what they have done.
Yeah, taking it one step further, they sort of redefine what healthy looks like at their new senior level. So, the more senior you get, health is really about being clear-headed under pressure. It's understanding how to manage energy and being able to sustain that, being able to recover quickly, and maintaining emotional regulation and avoiding, long-term burnout. It's much less about the aesthetics of what health looks like and more about capacity for taking on the additional roles that you're going to have as that senior leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We all only have 24 hours in a day, and leaders don't stay healthy by doing more in their already demanding schedules. They stay healthy by lowering the friction of what it is they want to accomplish, designing their schedules for disruptions, known and unknown. They do things like incorporate movement into their days and weeks, doing those micro workouts, doing mobility when you're getting up from one meeting to go to another, or even in a meeting, rolling your ankles, rolling your wrists, doing things that keep some juices flowing in your body so that you've got blood flowing from head to toe. They do things like take walking meetings. And they also protect their recovery, their sleep specifically, as seriously as they do their performance.
Yeah, ultimately, they're protecting their energy. They're identifying what are the minimum effective habits. They're anchoring their health to existing commitments. They're deciding in advance what gives under pressure, and they manage the inputs. Get rid of the guilt as a motivator and redefine what healthy looks like at the new level. Health needs to become something that absorbs stress, not another thing that creates it.
I think that's a great summary, Bill. Is there anything else you'd want to add?
I'm going to foot stop it one more time. This discussion is not negotiable. If you don't take care of this part, your career and your well-being at home are not sustainable. You got to take care of yourself so that you can take care of work and of the other folks in your life.
So true. This is a very, very important topic. So that's why we spent a little more time on it than we might normally spend on an episode. And with that, thank you all for listening to this episode of Mentoring in Real Life. If you have thoughts or questions, please leave us a comment or send us an email, which we've included in the show notes. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, rate the podcast, and share with a friend. Until next time, help others climb.